Hello and welcome back to another lecture. In this lecture, we will create the Dockerfile that we will use to build the container image for the Jupyter website. A Dockerfile is a text document that contains all the commands we will call on the command line to create a container image. To create the Dockerfile that we will use to build the container image for the Jupyter website, the first thing I want you to do is open Visual Studio Code. Once you have opened Visual Studio Code, the next thing we will do is open our project folder. And our project folder will be the Docker projects repository we cloned on our computer. To open the project folder in Visual Studio Code, select File and click Open Folder. Then browse to the location of your project folder. My project folder is on the desktop. I'll select Desktop. On my desktop, I'll select the Docker projects folder and click Select Folder. There you go. We have opened the Docker projects repository in Visual Studio Code. The next thing I'm going to do is close this. Once you have opened your project folder in Visual Studio Code, the next thing we will do is create a folder in this repository. To create a folder in it, right-click and click New Folder. Then give the folder a name. We will use this folder to store the Docker file for the Jupyter website. So I'll call the folder Jupyter website. Once you've given the folder a name, press Enter. Once you have created the Jupyter website folder, select it, and in that folder, we will create our Docker file. To create our Docker file in this folder, right-click on that folder and click New File, and name this file Dockerfile. Type your Docker file the same exact way I type mine. So it is a capital D and spell everything out, Dockerfile. Make sure you type your Docker file the exact way you see it on my screen. Once you type Docker file, press Enter. There you go, we have created the Docker file. And in this Docker file, all we have to do is write all the commands that we will use to build our container image for the Jupyter website. Before we list our command in the Docker file, there's something I want to explain to you. In the Jupyter website project, these are the commands we use to install the Jupyter website on our EC2 instance. So basically, what I'm trying to say is, these are the same commands we will use to create our Docker file that will build the container image for the Jupyter website. I have created the Docker file that we will use to build the container image for the Jupyter website. Download it from this video's description and open it. This is the Docker file I have created that we will use to build the container image for the Jupyter website. The next thing I want you to do is select everything in this file. Press Ctrl A to select everything, right-click to copy, and come back to your Docker file and paste everything in there. Once you've pasted the command in the Docker file, close the reference file because we don't need it anymore. The next thing I'm going to do is dock this here. On the right side of my screen, these are the commands we use to install the Jupyter website on an EC2 instance. And on the left side of my screen, this is the Docker file I created using these commands. To explain everything in this Docker file, let's start at the top. To create this Docker file that will build the container image for the Jupyter website, the first thing we did is we start with a base image. To specify a base image, in the beginning of your Docker file, you type from in all capital letters. Then once you type from in all capital letters, you specify the base image you want to use. This is similar to when we launch an EC2 instance in the management console and we use Amazon Linux too. In this Docker file, we are using an Amazon Linux based image. Another thing I want you to know is the base image comes from Docker Hub. So for any type of base image you are trying to use, you will find it in Docker Hub. Let's go to Docker Hub so I can show you. In Google, I'll type Docker Hub. I'll go to the Docker Hub website. On the Docker Hub website, you will find container images for every software you can think of. And if you look down here, these are some of the popular images people have downloaded. You can see there's Ubuntu, there's Postgres, there's MySQL, there's Nginx. For every software you can think of, there's probably a container image for it on Docker Hub. So let's scroll back up. The base image we are using in our Docker file to build the Jupyter website is Amazon Linux. So let's look for that image here. Type Amazon Linux in here. So basically, for any container image you are looking for, type the name in here. Once you type the name, press enter. Under the search results, this Amazon Linux image is what we are using as a base image in our Dockerfile. If you select it, the main thing I want you to know here is this is the Docker command to pull the image. Up here, you have the image name. And if you come down to supported tags, under tags, these are the different tags for Amazon Linux you can reference in your Dockerfile. So basically what I am trying to show you here is for any base image you are trying to use in your Dockerfile, you can find that base image in Docker Hub. Let's go back to Visual Studio Code. In our Dockerfile, we are using Amazon Linux as the base image and the tag we are referencing is latest. Once we have specified the base image, the next thing we will do is type run in all caps, and next to it, we will list the command we want to run. So for this first command, we run yum update -y, which will update all the packages on our container. Then we install Apache with yum install -y httpd. If you look, the same commands you see here are the same command we ran on our EC2 instance. Once we have installed the Apache web server, one of the limitations of a container is sometimes the packages you need may not be installed on the container. So what we have to do is install the packages. In this Dockerfile, we will use wget to download the web files from GitHub. Once we download the web files from GitHub, we will unzip it. So what we need to do is install the wget package and the package to unzip the zip folder. That is why we are running these commands to install the packages for wget and unzip. Once we have installed all the dependencies, the next thing we did is change our directory into the HTML directory. If you look at the command we ran on our EC2 instance, we change our directory to the HTML directory here, and in our Dockerfile, we are doing the same thing here. Once we change the directory to the HTML directory, next we use wget to download the web files from GitHub. In our command that we ran on the EC2 instance, this is the URL to download the web files from GitHub. I'll copy it. And in my Dockerfile, I'm going to replace this. Once we use wget to download the web files from GitHub, the next thing we did is unzip the folder we downloaded. If you look at the command we ran on our EC2 instance, we unzip the zip folder, and in our Dockerfile, we are doing the same. Once we have unzipped the folder, next we will copy all the web files into the HTML directory. When we ran the command on our EC2 instance, this is the command we use to copy all the web files into the HTML directory. I'll copy this command and I'll paste it here. Once we have copied all the web files into the HTML directory, we remove the zip folder we downloaded from GitHub and the folder we unzip. So we'll copy this command and paste it here. The next command in the Dockerfile is the port we want to expose, and in this example, we are exposing port 80. You can expose any port you want. For the last command in our Dockerfile, we are using entry point. An entry point is going to set the default application that will start when the container starts. In the commands we ran on the EC2 instance, these are the commands that start and enable the Apache web server, and in the Dockerfile, this is how we do the same. This is how you create a Dockerfile, and basically what I want you to take away from this lecture is the same commands we ran on the EC2 instance to install our Jupyter website are the same commands we use to create the Dockerfile. The only difference is we had to enter the commands in our Dockerfile in a format that Docker understands. We are done creating our Dockerfile. I'll close this and I'm going to maximize this. The next thing I want you to do is save your file. Click File and click Save All. Once you have saved your file, the next thing we will do is push our updates to our GitHub repository. To push the updates to the GitHub repository, select source control here. Then type your message in here. I'll type create Dockerfile. Once you've typed your message, click this check mark to commit it. And once you've committed your changes, click sync changes to push it to GitHub. And there you go. We have successfully pushed the updates to our GitHub repository. Let's check our GitHub repository to make sure the Dockerfile is there. In my GitHub account, I'll select the Docker projects repository. In the Docker projects repository, you can see the Jupyter website folder we created in that repository. If I click on that Jupyter website folder, there you go, my Dockerfile is in there. I'll select the Dockerfile, and you can see all the commands we wrote in our Dockerfile is here. This is how you create a Dockerfile and pushing the updates back to your GitHub repository. If you have any questions or there's any part of this lecture you don't understand, please leave your comments below. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next lecture. Bye.